Nicole, we're just waiting for one more member to start.
Okie dokie. So I'm over here putting out fires. I technically have 1 more minute.
I know I started an email before I started. I'm like, you know what? It can wait.
Right. I'm like, I just came out of one meeting. I was like, I got to run. I have a CAB meeting. So.
Yeah. And there's Lila. Hi, Lila.
Hello, folks.
That's the October 14th general meeting agenda.
Oh, no,
yeah, it's
I
not
have the wrong one. Sorry about that. Too many meetings. Give me 1 minute. We don't want to repeat that.
I was wondering why you were going to approve the CAB
meeting. I thought we'd do it again.
The CAB minutes at your meeting.
All right, I got the right one now. Whenever you're ready, Nicole.
Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I am Nicole Green. I'm the chair for the Programs and Service Subcommittee. So I want to welcome everyone to the meeting today. And I guess we can go around and do quick introductions. I don't really have any announcements yet, but we can go around and do quick introductions.
Yeah, why don't you start with yourself?
Oh, I thought I did. I kind of squeezed it in there. So, again, I am Nicole Green, and I am the chair of the Program and Service Subcommittee.
Lila.
Hello and good morning, everybody. I am Lila Blanchard, and I am the second person. I'm trying to remember exactly what that's called in these meetings. Second
vice chair.
Yes, it's vice chair, right?
Yeah, thank you. So it's really great to be here this morning. I will just let folks know that I'm actually coming from a pretty intense restorative justice meeting at my son's school. And so I may not be 100% the regular Lila, but I'm really glad that I could come and join, and glad to see all of your faces in this positive, important space.
Thank you.
Dale.
Yeah, Dale Harrington. Excited to be here.
Dr. Hernandez.
Hi, Dr. Hernandez. Excited to be here. I just had surgery last week, so I'm a little on the mend, but it's great to see everybody and be back together again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. We're glad to have you back. Mark will be presenting today.
Hello, Mark. I'm out here in Oakley. I'm on the Outreach and Community Engagement Committee.
Jonte.
Yes, Jonte, CAB member.
Melvin.
Good morning, Melvin Russell with the Probation Department.
Monique.
Hi, I'm Monique Tate with the Office of Reentry and Justice. Happy to be here with you.
And I'm Nicole Popchak, also with the Office of Reentry and Justice. And I think then, Nicole, that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Very excited to see everyone here today. Is there any announcements that anyone may have? Okay, no, moving right along. And then we can open it up for any public comment. All right, moving right along today. Okay, Nicole. So we can go next to the approval of our minutes from the September 16th Program and Service Subcommittee meeting. So I'll give everyone a second to kind of review. I believe Nicole put the link in the chat. If you don't already have it downloaded.
I did want to point out that I put all the links in that Mark, who's here today, had referenced. Some great material there. So
Everyone a quick second to kind of look through that. All right, I think that's it, right? Yep. Is there any comments or any feedback in reference to the minutes? Or do I have a motion to pass the approval for the minutes from the last subcommittee meeting?
I move we accept and pass the minutes.
I second that motion. This is Lila, and I believe that was
Dale.
That was Dale.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right.
Thank you. So Nicole, we have Dale that motion and Lila to second it.
yeah, if there's no public comment, I can do roll call vote.
Okay.
Lila?
Aye.
Dale?
Aye.
Nicole?
Aye.
Dr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next item on the agenda is to review our work plan for future subcommittee work. In previous meetings that we had, we kind of talked about housing research and different recommendations, but it will be something that we'll look into further, maybe in the upcoming year. So we want to have a discussion around what our goals are in reference to housing and the recommendations. On some of our previous meetings, I know that Denise and Patrice participated on our calls, and we were looking into possibly how to open up or making recommendation for the funding to be opened up to individual that doesn't just fall under the AB 109. As well as different possible housing options that could benefit individuals in reentry. So, what does that look like? What does that look like for the reentry population? So what other type of housing resources or recommendations that we can look into? And sorry to jump over, we will look at the work plan as went to that straight to that bullet. But that is one topic that I really want to look into. And I know that RJ spoke about it also on the full cab is different resources and recommendations in reference to housing. So one of the main topics was how do we open it up to other individuals outside of AB 109 and what changes can we bring to it? So we'll love you guys' feedback. As some of you guys may know, outside of the subcommittee, one of my main jobs is housing through one of the our programs. So I have a lot of feedback in reference to that. But I guess talk about how do we want to address this in the upcoming year. And just my feedback on that, and really open up for the rest of the committee, as well as others on the call for their feedback. But I think it is a good idea to look at the different ways that the funding is being used for housing for our clients. I believe that COVID has taught us a lot, right? On the last CAB general meeting, we were talking about mental health and other areas. So I think it's looking at how the funding is actually being allocated right now for individuals that have served time. Should we open it up, or can we open it up to other individuals that are not just falling into AB 109? Also, different notes I made for myself is, are we missing certain populations that are not getting services through the housing? To me, is another great research area that we should look into. I can't recall the young lady that spoke on the CAB. Maybe Nicole, you can help me. I cannot think of her name, but she was talking about working with coordinated entry. And I know that ORJ has also worked with coordinated entry. I think that that'll be a great resource point, just with having that, being familiar with working with them. There are a lot of gaps in there in reference to reentry and what services out there are available to them. So for myself, I just think it's a good, if we look into this next year, one of the key starter points will be looking at the housing services that are out there. What limitations are there available? What limitations are there for our reentry population? I know that I have found a lot already just in my role outside of the subcommittee. How can we bridge those gaps, in reference to those connections? There are a lot of services that our clients don't have access to, and figuring out that why and how we can remove that gap so that we can open them up to other housing options. And also how we can, better serve our clients with the options we have right now. Majority of the options is, transitional or sober living environments. Are there other things we should look into in reference to like permanent supportive housing? Right now, our goal is rapid rehousing, right? That's the focus on housing. So those are some of my feedbacks in reference to housing research and recommendations. Really would love to hear from others, or any questions that they have, or feedback and recommendations that they may have in that area. It's a quiet bunch today.
I just wanted to answer your question, Nicole. I'm not sure what you're referring to, the coordinating reentry reference. Was that from the?
It was from the full CAB. I can't think of her name, and darn it, I thought I wrote it down, but God, I can't think of her name. She had mentioned how they were trying to work with coordinated entry to go inside of the prisons and connect with more resources so that when individuals are released, they have more access to housing. I cannot think, I can picture her face.
Was that Janet Evans?
Yes, thank you.
And I think I actually, Jana had put a bunch of notes in the chat, and I had, before I commented, I had asked her to expound on that, because it sort of goes round and round with all the different things that they're doing. They added an SUD counselor to the GBS program. And so, I think the suggestion was for them to reach out to H3 to see about some sort of a housing liaison. Because I know the core outreach teams, there was some discussion before the pandemic about core doing inReach to connect to people who are, stated homeless, to get them connected to resources before they leave as part of that whole sort of full package. So it was about reconnecting to all of that. And I had mentioned that LaVonna Martin, who was the director of H3, is now promoted to an assistant health director. And she oversees not only H3, but also the detention system, which is a really nice linkage.
I definitely think that's, that's awesome. And I am interested, we look into this, the research behind that and the outcome, because I know just with my personal experience, there are limitations when it comes to this population. There is, the way that they look at what is considered homeless based on how we look at it from an ORJ perspective is completely different. How individuals get connected to those individual services is different. And that is one of the key things outside of here that I looked into with H3 and Core. Just to my own personal program in reference to getting clients connected to their services, there's a big dislink. So I was just curious to figure out, once they get released, how would that connect over to H3 and Core, or would it end up getting right back around over to the housing? But as I mentioned, I felt like that's a good place to start. In my opinion, it all starts with H3 and coordinated entry, because that's where most of the housing programs are housed. So how do we get reentry population connected to those services that they actually have?
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is that HUD has the definition is different than necessarily other funding sources. So HUD is literally homeless, not couch surfing. They don't consider that. So there's that. And then I also am, this is day 2 of a conference, which is why I'm late, that the Council of State Governments is holding. And one of the subjects that just came up today is about the carve out for anybody who has a criminal history, not being able to access certain types of housing. And apparently they are working on that at a federal level because it's been determined by the courts, and I don't know which court system, but it's been determined that that's discriminatory, since a large portion of our incarcerated population are African-American. We essentially are discriminating against that population. So apparently there's some movement at the federal level to address that issue when it comes to things like housing vouchers and that sort of thing. So that's good news. Nothing for us to do at this point in time, but just to be aware that there is conversation being had at a higher level to help that population.
Awesome, thank you.
So I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself, and then I just had a follow-up comment, you know, based on the discussion so far and Nicole's question.
I'm sorry, you want me to introduce myself? Is that what you said? I'm Jill Ray with Supervisor Candace Anderson's office.
Thank you so much. I know we all got a chance to introduce ourselves on the call just before you joined. So Nicole, I really like what you're laying out about, you know, making this, you know, a clear, you know, instruction or recommendation for the next following year, since we are, you know, approaching the end of this year, and, you know, basically after this meeting have 2 more meetings remaining. I really like that, and I like the idea of specifically focusing on housing resources that are currently folks are able to access, and even if there could be some type of map or, you know, brochure from H3 that you know, really outlines all of outlines those services, so we could start with information from different entities and potentially also, you know, create our own map and list of services. Nicole, how do I pronounce your last name, Nicole P?
Pop, like popcorn, and check, like a check mark.
Yeah, so Nicole Popcheck, is there anything that already exists like that within ORJ literature, or does that sound like that would need to be a new resource that we create?
Of what the connection is to resources upon reentry?
Of housing resources through ORJ dollars, and, you know, who qualifies for them.
I am not aware of any brochure that specifies that, because we don't get the participants coming and calling us. It's done through other avenues, other departments internally. I'm not sure personally myself what that process looks like.
Mm-hmm. Do we know if H3 has literature about their services and their process, which would be a starting point to add other agencies like Shelter Inc. And, you know, Lao Community Services and other providers?
So I can piggyback off of that. RJ doesn't have it, but Health Right 360 made one. H3 doesn't have one. 211 has majority of all the stuff listed, but based on my personal conversation with H3 and CORE, that's the dislink I would like to correct. There isn't an outline for the reentry housing. It's solely based on the individual programs that are funded. For example, Sheltering or LAOs. That's where the information comes from. So that's the connection that we have to make, which is with H3 and CORE. Just speaking with people from there is a disconnect when it comes to our population, the services that they need. So the flyer is generated by us, the programs. There isn't an exact flyer that goes out there, but I know that Health Right 360, and there's one other that actually put together a document. I believe probation did, and I know parole did. They have like a document with everything listed, but no one like ORG or anyone has made an actual brochure with all the stuff on it.
I kind of take a step back. It's not necessarily a brochure, but it is like a partner directory that
that thing
that we distribute. It's not for like public, like a participant that's reentering into the community. It's not for it's not geared towards them. It's more towards our partners internally and our CBOs to be able to see these are the lists of service providers for the individual services that we offer within the AB19 population, the funding that we get. Is there opportunity to improve that? Yes, but yeah, that's.
So just also to give a bit of background, there used to be a resource guide that was published by ORJ and before that, and it was basically just a printout of the 211 resources, and it wasn't for the amount of money that was being spent to produce that. They swiveled that money to do the newspaper that they now do, and so everybody is directed basically to 211 since all the resources are there, which includes housing, and that's where if anybody is interested in housing, 211 is the first step. And then of course there's the centers. So, you know, it's sort of almost like that in-reach person would be critical because they could almost, with the idea of bringing the in-reach into the detention system as part of GPS to start that process of assessment and determination for best housing.
Yeah, and this is Melvin Russell with probation. You know, with all of the reentry clients that we work with, you know, prior to COVID, when we had our deputy going into the prisons and into county jail, you know, they would, you know, do the assessment, and if housing was a need, they then would definitely work with the client to make the referrals and sort of get them all set up so they wouldn't have to come out and try to navigate it on their own of going to sort of 211, right? Because a lot of them wouldn't have access to computers, internets, or anything like that. And so contract we have with the West County Reentry Center, making the referral down there, and then us doing the referrals, HR 360, Shelters Inc., and all those other things.
All right, thank you. Great conversation.
So I hear a couple of potential outputs here. I hear that, you know, this subcommittee may want to consider, you know, supporting a recommendation, you know, for an in-reach staff within the facilities, you know, taking into account COVID protocols for safety. So that's one piece. And then it could be something that could be valuable for the community if we, you know, put together, if we, you know, shared out resources from some of the different housing organizations at our next meeting, and then, you know, C, I guess I'm already at C, that second one was B, and see if we, you know, input somewhere in our suggested plan moving forward to, you know, to create a document which brings together a number of resources, whether it's from 211 or from, you know, the core services or H3, and, you know, the different individual, you know, housing providers who receive AB 109 funding.
Well, that was one part of it that I took from it, but the major part of it was, I believe, when Patrice and Denise spoke about it, they really wanted for the subcommittee to look into how we can outside of that, we are correct in reference to that piece, but also what recommendations can we make in reference to us looking into what other housing can be available? How can we better the housing that's already put in place and expand on it? Because I know that's their goal right now, is how can they, better utilize the fund to ensure that they're providing the proper housing for people. So I think outside of, the note that you made as well is looking at what's there. What recommendations can we make based on those programs? Is it really helping our population or not? There's been I think COVID taught us a lot, and it's not going to work the way it used to work. So I think they're asking as a subcommittee is looking at the current housing programs and services in place. What recommendations do we see there that can possibly be changed? And as I mentioned, just from coming from a housing perspective, I have a lot that I can throw out there. But I think that was one thing that, Denise had mentioned in with the changes they're making in reference towards the program. So I think that's also a place to start is as a committee, do we want to take a look at that? I know we're at the end of the year this time, so that's why I'm making the recommendation to add it as a point to look into next year. But that's piece of it as well. It's not just creating that document to connect them to services, because that's all well and dandy, but how can we, or what not how, but what do we see that can be changed to housing for the population and open it up to other individuals as well that are not just AB 109.
Would that be all system-wide housing or just the AB 109 services that offer housing?
In my recommendation, I think, anybody feedback, I would start looking at all, because it shouldn't matter what their background is. They should be available to have access to all housing. And that's what I'm running into now is that's the piece missing for our population. They are, what's the word for it? They're stuck with this certain amount of housing that they can just get, and they have access to others. So I think it's looking, or I could be thinking too wide. Maybe we can start off looking at just what's available for them from a reentry standpoint and then expand. But just start somewhere. Maybe I think we should just first look at what's there and what could be fixed from that level, and then maybe expand out to what's available out there. That's just me thinking.
I agree with you, Nicole and Nicole G and Nicole Green. I also see that, maybe with these couple of months, we could, as a starting place, kind of review some of the literature or brochures, that already exist from the existing organization, just to kind of begin the familiarization process with, with what some of those organizations are doing.
Well, I'll leave it up to the CAB. The subcommittee. I know that we were focusing on restorative justice. That was like one of our key topics for this year and looking at our work plan. So I didn't want to add an extra part on it. I mean, we'll have to go out and collect it from all those housing and determine all the housing programs. So if everyone thinks it's feasible that we can do that in the last 2 months, we could definitely try, or we can make it a goal to, have it as a point, right? Write down what our goals are going into that year and kind of a game plan and focus on what we were, working on as of right now. Or if we feel like that's something that we can do as a subcommittee, then I'm all aboard for it.
Looks like Dale has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you. Yes, Dale.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm new to not only this, but to the Council on Aging. And the Council on Aging has a housing work group. And I don't know if, excuse me, if any of us here have connections there. I am on that work group, but I'm new to all of that. And I'm wondering if maybe they might have some information that they could share with us here and vice versa.
I'm not familiar with that. That'd be great. If you can find out if you don't mind, find out if they do have information to share, that'd be great. And then possibly bring it back to our next meeting. That'd be okay?
Sure.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of summarize as I'm taking notes here, what the ask is the ask for CAB to create a document of all resources so that when participants come out of the jail, they know where to start. I'm just trying to understand what is the final deliverable that we're looking. Are we just looking to see what the literature says, or are we looking to advocate for CAB to create a final deliverable that would be the one document of, I guess, the one document of truth as far as where they can go to get services?
So I'll go ahead.
That's all right. Go ahead, Nicole. I can.
No, go ahead. I was gonna. You can go ahead.
I was going to say that I hear that there are two deliverables that we're talking about. You know, one of them is taking a look at the existing AB 109 funding for housing and starting there and having a clear picture of where those dollars go. That's one output. And there's another one, you know, idea that's in play of creating some kind of document or resource that can be used by partners, service providers, departments, and potentially even, you know, participants that is helpful and a guide, which, you know, paints a picture of the housing resources. And it sounds like these two documents would, you know, help guide us in identifying gaps and making recommendations. And I totally agree with you, Nicole Green, that it's going to be important to make a game plan of what we do want to do for housing, you know, in the next couple of months and, you know, in the year moving forward.
Thank you. She pretty much summed it up for me.
I bet you have something to add. I bet you had something.
No, I like when you go first. You pretty much, she summed it up for me.
So I guess the key is that you're trying to identify the gaps. You're not trying to create like a flyer for a participant, because that would be the network or the reentry success center that I would think that would be owning something like that, right?
Yes.
For actually getting the word out there.
Yes. I don't think we need a flyer, because I believe that, for example, like you said, the success center, they already have one. I know they're out there.
It would be good if, you know, and I agree with you, Nicole Green, that we're not going to get all of the resources together in the next 2 months. And that's, you know, would be an unrealistic goal and it wouldn't feel very good. I'm just wondering if there are places we can start with sharing information next meeting. So, you know, requesting this document from Health Right 360 and asking RSC, the Reentry Success Center, if they have a similar document, and, you know, sharing those out in our agenda notes and, you know, reading them prior to the next meeting, and just, you know, kind of starting to collect some of what's already out there.
So, I mean, I think that's possible. We can decide on who knows who, like Health Right 360. I don't mind asking. Of course, I came from Shelter Inc., so I have that. I can ask Nicole. I don't know if RJ can get something from Laos. I don't have a direct contact at Laos to request for anything like that.
So the AB 109 partner directives is probably a good place to start, because it has all of our contacts for all the individual current service providers, including the network and the Reentry Success Center, and then Lau, and of course yourself, which I don't think you need.
Yeah, I have
your
mine.
information.
So can I ask you, when reaching out to them, is there going to be like a certain email format, like we're doing for the ambassador, that we would send out, or?
I think it's a little bit more casual than that. I mean, you're a fellow service provider yourself, seeking information, and happen to be a CAB member as well. But yeah, I mean, if you want to run it by me, I can.
Okay. I definitely will. I need you and Monique's input. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so for the sake of time, any more input in reference to housing? Nicole, did we answer the questions that you had? Are we good to go?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm just curious if Dr. Michelle Hernandez or Dale had anything else they wanted to add. Thank you, Dale, for that connection on aging for homelessness. I feel like there's actually a committee that's solely focused on homelessness, and I wonder if they would also, if it's the same one or a different committee, and if they, in similar fashion, you know, would have some work that's already advanced in this way.
Yeah, I've been attending, started to attend the homelessness grouping too, and they are separate. So I hadn't thought about them. What I will do is I will try to find a contact person on the ACOA housing work group, and I can provide that to Nicole P. And then she can maybe share that information ahead of our next meeting here in the event that someone wants to make connections prior to our meeting. And they would also be able to ask questions that I wouldn't know about.
Yeah, there's a Council of Homelessness that I know the staff person on. That's quite a big committee as far as the work that they're doing. So definitely the Council on Homelessness. It's the Continuum of Care, Council of Homelessness. It's quite a big, yeah, they have quite the presence in the community as far as the work that they're doing.
I think too, I agree with Lila and Nicole Green about the housing. And I think part of the ask too would be, it's really important to look at the accessibility and lack thereof of the housing for disabled people. I know I've been in the county for a long time, and just trying to get housing here is ridiculous. So if you have a disability, landlords don't either want to rent to you because they're worried about the wheelchair ruining their house, or there's not enough assistance, financial assistance or otherwise. So I think that's something I'd be willing to research. When we talk about these housings, I can call and ask like how many of their dwellings are accessible, because I do that all the time and just trying to look for my own housing. So I would just like to point that out, because I think that's something really important, especially if there's for people going back into the system. There isn't, if they have a disability, and because of COVID, there's a lot of sick people that we need to accommodate. So I'm just want to focus on inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. That's a very good point. You are absolutely correct. Okay. Any more feedback in this area?
I see that the work plan is now pulled up. Are we speaking to making any adjustments to the work plan regarding housing, or are we looking to move on to looking at the work plan?
From my understanding, and forgive me, I wasn't on the last call, in reference to the work plan where we're looking at the area, where is it? In reference to site visits, I don't believe we're adding anything in reference to housing as of yet. Today's topic was kind of get an idea of what we're going to do going forward, due to the timing left in this year. So I believe when it came to the work plan, we were going to revisit that area regarding site visits, because we left with that a couple of months ago and never revisited. I'm not sure what your discussion was on that for the last call.
Whoever is sharing the screen, could you scroll down on the work plan a little bit? I think site visits is in the promote a comprehensive needs assessment section. And I think that we realized that we hadn't touched on our work plan on the first and third section in quite some time. So checking to see what progress we've made, if there are any adjustments we need to make at this point for either of those two initiatives. Could you make it a little bit bigger as well, the promote a comprehensive needs assessment? Thank you.
So I think we need to figure out, do we still think that we can, because the last time we had this conversation, you know, and due to COVID, we're unable to do in-person site visits. So we were trying to figure out if we wanted to continue this and probably do it via Zoom. And if we did, you know, what will we look at? So do we still feel like this is a an item that we could do as a subcommittee? Do we want to keep this item here? And if so, I mean, there's some places that are opening for site visits and there are some that are not. So how do we want to implement this to get this completed?
You know, I see that that Dr. Hernandez, you know, was listed in this section as, you know, one of the drivers. And I'm just wondering, Dr. Hernandez, if you have any updates or information or your thoughts on this section that you want to share at this time.
Yeah, I think I haven't talked to Jerry about it since, so I kind of wanted to get a hold of her and see how things are going. But I'm not sure, since things have seemed like they've changed so much in a short amount of time. Maybe we'll have to alter it somewhat.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Jerry is no longer on the Community Advisory Board or our subcommittee. So, you know, that would be great if, you know, she wanted to have a conversation with you and pass the baton. I just don't know, okay, Nicole, if Nicole P., if she indicated that she would still be available to follow up on any of these pieces, or if she's, yeah, basically,
she didn't specify that. I mean, she was, you know, she had specified that she's looking forward to seeing the work that CAB does, but I mean, there's no harm in, if you want to reach out to her. If you don't have her contact information, I can get that to you.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll start there. But
I believe the background here was to have site visits to get a better understanding, because she was new. Or not new, she's been on CAB for a while. Or has she? I don't remember. Anyway, she wanted to get a sense of the work that the CBOs were doing. And that was this one way to go about doing it. So
okay. I'll figure
at this point, I think that the subcommittee just needs to decide, is this still the avenue that the group wants to continue to address on an annual basis to onboard new members to get a sense of the work that's being done, or what is the real goal here? And maybe we need to start outlining goals in our work plans, because it's not defined here necessarily.
Yeah,
because I had Nicole, I agree, because I had a different impression. I thought that we were going out to visit the sites to determine how programs are actually utilizing the fundings for their program, to kind of see what they're day in and day out, how are they using those funds that are allocated to their agency, and kind of get information on that. I didn't get the feedback that it was just for
Maybe
Jerry.
it was a little bit of both.
Yeah, it could have been, because I kind of came in, so I had the intel.
And with, you know, ORJ taking out an evidence-based practice approach to their contracting, I'm assuming that the evaluation on the ORJ side will be doing some of this work.
Okay.
Just not right now, right? Because we're not in that cycle yet. So, so those are just things that I think need to be aligned on what the purpose is, and with the work that ORJ is doing, is it a partnership or is it something different? I think that we just don't want to duplicate efforts here, right? That's my point.
So I guess just hearing you, I guess the first thing is to figure out, is RJ doing the evaluations? If so, when? And like you said, at that point, we can come back and decide, so that we're not duplicating. Do we just want to remove this one? Because that's the part that I took from this. Pretty much we were going out and doing pretty much what I think RJ is about to do with their evaluation. So if that's the case, then it's no need for it to still be there, right?
I mean, I think it's kind of TBD. I mean, depending on what our evaluations look like, it could be that we're reporting out and you guys are reviewing those evaluations.
Okay.
Kind of like how the policy and budget subcommittee reviews the budget at the CCP that's submitted, right? They look at that data to make decisions, and maybe that's the same thing here, is that this group would look at that data and make some recommendations.
Okay.
We just don't know what that's going to look like yet. So
I think for me on this section, and the experience that we've garnered this week this year, and I have been on the CAB, this subcommittee for 2 years now running. I feel like a comprehensive needs assessment is a pretty big task. And, you know, if we were going to keep that would need to be like a primary activity. And I feel like maybe we have more energy right now to do a needs assessment in focused areas like housing, which is what we were talking about earlier, and or restorative justice, which I think we tried to do to some degree this year. So I think what I would say is I think we could keep this. I would personally probably choose to narrow it a bit and not try to do a comprehensive needs assessment of all services, just because that's a very big undertaking. I also feel like the site visits, you know, an alternative to that is having different organizations come and present. I think, you know, that specific request was coming from like not being familiar with these organizations and wanting to have more of a tactile, or departments, you know, wanting to have more of a tactile learning experience. And so I wonder, you know, moving forward, whether, you know, if it is focused in a couple of areas, you know, if maybe there's just one site visit that we choose to do, and it's, you know, comes from the work that we're doing and choosing, as opposed to we want to visit as many sites as possible, you know, which is also a huge undertaking.
See your hand up, Dale.
Yes. Are transportation issues something that is studied by CAB? And would this committee have some involvement in that? But then that expands it out, Lila. So your point is we don't need to add more. We may need to focus. We probably would need to identify everything, but then from that list of that listing, then make certain selections to focus on.
I think that's a really good point, Dale. And I know that they're coming out of the Programs and Services Subcommittee. There was a new proposal for transportation for folks who are getting released from incarceration outside of hours. And so I think that there was even like a new RFP that was put out, and some funding was expanded in that area. And, you know, I think you're making a good point. Like, what's our process to choose what we're focusing on? Is it, you know, looking at everything and then selecting a few? You know, do we already have our areas of focus, or does that require, you know, more research or more dialogue? And, you know, the next year, the CAB may come in with, you know, I'm passionate about this. The CAB members may come in, you know, with different areas of focus that they want to bring as well.
Yeah, you know, Dr. Hernandez was talking about housing and disabled people, and they may have problems with transportation as well.
Yeah, it's good that you specifically bring up transportation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it all plays in. I mean, from what we see in probation, employment is the issue as well. You get the folks housing, and then, you know, once it's turned over to them to have to pay or whatever, if they're not employed, then they're going to lose that housing. And so with AB 109, and I remember because I was a supervisor that came on in 2000, and when the program come 2011, and been in it, and housing has always been sort of that issue of, do we have enough housing, right? And I think when you start going out there and looking, it wasn't about what programs were offering housing. It was the actual houses that we could put people into, and not having enough inventory for that to happen. And I know over the years, Shelter Inc. sort of changed the way that they were looking at it, of going to master leases and trying to work with landlords to do all of that stuff. And then just to go back to one of the questions of, do you start with AB 109 or just the broader sense from probation? That was always the frustration of my deputies who didn't work in AB 109 was, hey, there's a lot of resources and everything thrown out there for the AB 109 population, but what about my general sup population? They need housing as well. I just don't know how you overcome sort of that funding stream of saying legislatively, AB 109 funding is used for AB 109 folks, and how do you sort of skirt the line to say, hey, well, they're all returning back to the community, whether they're returning back from prison or a county jail or a program, or they just need assistance in the county. How do you sort of look at that? So it's tough, I think, in just my opinion, if you only narrow it down to housing, because there are so many other different factors that play into it. I mean, if you're talking about sort of folks going to substance abuse programs or whatnot, right? They have to be ready to be able to go to housing. And which one comes first? Do you deal with sobriety and you get that squared away before you can get a job, before you can then keep housing? And so it's sort of like that triangle thing of looking at them all. And then I guess the CAB then just has to figure out what's the priority. But to me, and just from sort of experience, like that all goes hand in hand. So.
Yeah, and I would think mental health issues,
yes,
but as it relates to behavioral issues, obviously, you know, housing providers are going to have some concern about, you know, their property not being destroyed by someone who has mental health issues.
And I mean, a great point, Dale, and I definitely agree with Melvin. It can't be looked at individually. The clients have to be helped as a whole around all areas of it. So I think it is a good point. As a subcommittee, if we could look at those things, because I don't believe there's one that can be labeled more important than the other. Even from a housing perspective, like you said, Dale, with mental health, and someone with substance abuse, you can't prevent them from going to, you don't want to prevent them from going to employment, because the goal is to get them into housing. And it's, how do you look at that? So that was one of the key points that I was trying to mention when I was referring to housing, is looking at these programs to see, you know, what changes can we put into there? You know, how are we doing the housing right now? Is it being beneficial to these clients the way that it's being presented right at this particular point? Because we do have individuals that are dealing with substance abuse that may need, like you said, transportation or mental health. So you know that they're not going to be able to secure housing or get back on their feet within a year. It's going to take longer time for some of those people. So I think we should look at all the services as a whole when it comes to that population. And how do we look at those different areas, like Melvin said, when it's AB 109, when it's just solely focusing on that population, not the general pop. There is a large amount of individuals that have served time that are not getting help. So as a committee, how do we want to address that is the point here, but you got all made some great feedback. And I really appreciate it.
This has come up in a few of our meetings. And, you know, if it can just be highlighted and, oh, wow. Okay. I've been taking written notes, but I forgot, you know, about this is my job to like take the typed notes. Hopefully I'll get some help with putting the notes together. But basically, utilizing AB 109 resources for the larger reentry population, you know, whether that's housing or more broadly, and how can we go deeper on that question or push in, you know, to that blockage or sticking point. You know, what information do we need? Where do we need to go to get it? I'm also hearing described like a triage process almost, that for different individuals, you know, their priorities are going to look differently depending on their circumstances and what they need first, and, you know, when and how they need it. So I've heard the idea before about, and I think that was the intention of the SIM map that we looked at earlier this year in this subcommittee, was to follow a person who, you know, has mental health considerations as they move through, you know, the criminal justice system, and then services afterwards. And so, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I'm adding with that, but I'm just noticing that. And I'm wondering if we can scroll up to the first kind of bucket in area of, you know, of this work plan, to see, you know, are these two interlapping, you know, intersecting or overlapping? I think that they might be. Yeah, and maybe that'll help us determine a process moving forward, or a recommendation, you know, for next year about what kind of information we want to gather, and then what we want to do with that information afterwards.
So do we want to leave this as an open item and come back and revisit this on our next call, or? Because I just want to, for the sake of time, I want to make sure I allow Mark to do a presentation.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I would say, or yeah, what I will say here is, we didn't quite produce a white paper. We did attach to this agenda a summary of, you know, what we discussed around restorative justice, and I tried to take some findings from what we had learned, and you may have noticed me in the last, you know, general meeting, you know, trying to advocate for all organizations to have restorative justice type practices or offerings. In our talking points and our policy, you know, work, yeah, I don't have the language right in front of me, but generally I think it was advocating for more restorative justice, and especially looking at access to restorative justice programs, and you know, equity in access to those. So, you know, I think if I'm in the right spot on the agenda right now, I guess my question was if folks, you know, reviewed that document. It's not a whole white paper, we know that. But if folks, you know, reviewed our notes and had questions or other findings from our conversations around restorative justice that you want to make sure get carried forward, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone have any feedback?
I think the last thing that I'll add, and then maybe it is time to pass the baton to Mark for some more information around restorative justice, is, you know, I feel like the topics for, you know, research projects and advocacy, you know, do flow out of the third section of this work plan. So you know, if I'm looking at our work plan and moving it forward, you know, I'm thinking that perhaps a recommendation for next year is that, you know, you start with a real concentrated focus on the third point, and then identify those areas of focus, you know, once that critical and or broader picture is viewed.
Any other comments or suggestions or anything from any feedback in reference to Lila's comment that anyone wants to add? Or okay, Nicole, do you have everything you need? We can. The next one on our agenda is from Mark. Yep, we're good to go.
Turning it over to me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Nicole. I was like, is she going to take her mic off? So, but yes, Mark, go ahead. You're next on the agenda.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we were going to, I had mentioned the International Institute of Restorative Practices website that has a lot of information on. So I'm going to go right to it. I'm going to share the screen. So this is their website. This is one page, defining restorative. So one of the issues that was brought up in, I think, the General Cabinet meeting too, is how do we define things? What is restorative justice and what is restorative practices? So IRP is an international institute. It's an accredited graduate school. You can actually get a master's degree in restorative justice. So they're approaching restorative justice as a social science. So one thing I'll show is who they are. So you can get a master's of science, graduate certificate. So they actually train many of the faculty and staff of schools. And I attended, while I was working with a nonprofit organization, I was restorative justice manager. I attended their trainings. Usually schools or school districts send their teachers. There's like 40 people at a time in a training, and it costs about $400 a piece. So usually school districts are the ones who can afford it, but I was able to take the trainings. So they focus on educators, and they did train people in San Francisco school district when they implemented their restorative justice project, and it's been going pretty well. Of course, one thing I learned about the whole process is that it takes about 5 years actually to get it going in any organization or school. It has to be a shift of culture, and that's part of one of the most difficult things. So that's who they are. They're out of Pennsylvania, so I have taken their trainings. So when they focus on defining restorative practices, they see restorative practices as the big frame, and then restorative justice is part of it. So if you take restorative practices and you apply them to a justice situation where you have someone who's done harm, sometimes called the offender, someone who's been harmed, they can be called the victim. So they define restorative justice in the strict sense of mainly around a restorative justice conference, whether it's informal or formal, but where you have the victim offender, you have their supporters, you have members of the community all coming together to help restore the relationships between people. And it actually is more victim-centered, that we are restoring the harm done, but it involves the whole community, not just two people or a group of people. So that's how they basically define restorative. So they often say, so a restorative conference is where you see the victim, offender, person harmed or not harmed in the same circle. Usually everything in restorative practices is done in a circle, in a general format, because it's equalizing. It allows people to face each other, and it has people to work with each other better. So the whole point is working with people, not telling people what they should do or criticizing them for what they didn't do, but everybody works to trying to heal or remedy the wrongdoing that was done. So that's the big difference. Let me show you. So what they have as far as restorative justice, so there's many types of practices. Everything from dealing with the offender's responsibility. There's many projects or trainings that deal with that side. There's the victim's reparation, and there's a lot on that side. And then there's communities of care, but in the center where they all overlap, where all these different people invested in this come together, is restorative justice in their definition. So in a way, it's not to put down any other practices, because many practices can be restorative. Even a dance can be restorative, but it's not considered restorative justice. I mean, it can be a part of a restorative justice practice, just like in a conference scene where you've had the victim and offender facing each other and all the supporters. You can have 20 people there, or you can only have 5. But at the end, they often have a little snacks and food, and people, talk and mingle with the others. So that's part of the process, but it's not the main part of the restorative justice part, where all the groups try to come together to build healthy relationships in the community and between each other. So all of this is on this website. Now, the stuff I'm showing you now on the website, though, 2 years ago when I first became 3 years involved, there was a link right on their homepage to get to this. If you want to look over the stuff, you're going to have to take this address here and save it, but it's still connected to their website, but you can't find access to it unless you Google this. So you can also download this PDF. So this download for the PDF has all the information on these different pages on it. And you can look that over and save it. So they're not hiding the information, it's set up differently than what it used to be. So one of the main things, their approach is this social discipline window. And this goes back 30 years. You might've heard it in psychology as parenting styles, or also styles of leadership. They were called authoritarian, which is my way or the highway, or very strict, or some people, just like in parenting, very permissive, laissez-faire, and then the not, where you don't do anything, you don't give guidance or restrictions or rules, and you don't give any support. So mainly it's about support, and it's about control and discipline. So a very good restorative justice conference is very structured in its methods, but it's also very supportive. So that's the thing, the more you're trying to keep things in line and structure, because I got to be very careful in a conference that not more damage isn't done, but there's both parties are all listened to. So, but then they focus on working with. So regardless of the situation, restorative justice, we're working with the other people or restorative practices. So you can do this with HR. They got HR websites on restorative, using restorative practices, with where people work together rather just the CEO tells everybody what to do. Everybody is under authoritarian rule. Various where you sit in a circle and you at least have a chance to be listened to, hear your side, and everybody's respected. That's something like down further, they call it fair process. So, and so they tried, we were just doing the evidence-based practices. They try to base the practices on evidence, social psychology evidence, sociology, and all the things that's been learned by indigenous communities. So they've learned practices that actually keep communities helpful, help to repair harm and conflicts, for it destroys their social fabric. So they did a while, of course, colonization and other wars and all that have disrupted that, but they're still there. And just like they've learned ancient ways of healing people physically with herbs, they found ancient ways of helping people that doesn't necessarily involve strict science, but when science gets involved, they find that practices work. So that's what I often do when I do a circle anyway. If I've just read something that gratitude, expressing gratitude every day for a few minutes is good, I started just introducing that as one of our gathering questions. It's like, what are you grateful for? I usually ended with it, and that always raised the energy, positive energy levels. So one of the things they base a lot of their approach is on the science that was done on the 9 effects. So a man named Tompkins, he studied babies, and he noticed that babies had certain effects. You know, it's even 6 months old. They can't talk, but when they see something that they're not sure of, they get a certain look on their face, like, what is that? And then if it's something that scares them, you see fear look, but they also have this anger, like, what's going on? Disgust, they smell something bad, shame, humiliation, distress. So he found out that these 9 effects, but you also have enjoyment and joy. So he finds out the practice of restorative practices is you acknowledge the negative effects, people get to talk about them, and through the process, move towards joy and enjoyment. And that's usually what happens in a good circle by the end. People who come in being worried, anxious, frowning, end up smiling and feeling joy. So that's part of the way of restorative practices. But even when you apply it to a restorative justice conference. So bringing this in, so if we're looking for some, framework or some definition to use of what's restorative practices versus what is restorative justice, I think this organization, and since they're international and they're a graduate school that pays a lot of attention to the research, theirs might be a good way to approaching it. But all restorative justice conferences and practices aren't done the same. I mean, there's cultural flavors to it, social values that play a part of it. And so I know the Navajo call it peacemaking, and they have they brain in, especially in family court, they use it, except their facilitators take a more active role in trying to get the people to come to a peaceful resolution to it more than we normally do. The facilitators in restorative conferencing, we usually make sure we're being neutral and not braining our own stuff in it, but to keep the structure and the community agreements are adhered to. So does anyone have any questions about this? Is another important one was compass of shame. Is something very important to work on. A lot of the violence is related to, or violence against self is based on shame, and it's pervasive in most societies, a way to keep people under control. But this is something also we work with, shame. So if you've ever been through prison, you know that the whole issue is trying to be shameful, have you be shamed and humiliated. And when some people, especially men who identify with the masculine aspect, they become violent, they attack, and they even kill when they are humiliated. So all these things are looked at closely. So these are some of the core things they look at. And so we looked at the topology. So that's a good one to understand what restorative justice. And so I guess I'll stop there unless someone has questions. So the thing is, if you want to get back to that, I'll put it in the chat where this is, so you can find it.
I think Nicole P might have already put the link up there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Nicole, when you leave this, will this room stay open for us for the next 5 or so minutes?
Yeah, so I made Monique co-host,
Okay.
and I also made Nicole Green co-host, so you guys can have full control.
Thank you.
And my update for the DA is in the chat, but if you can follow up with me afterwards if you have questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Mark, I just wanted to say that was so helpful for me. And I know that I've heard folks on this subcommittee say, like, just want like an introduction or introductory experience to what restorative justice can look like. And I think that we could, maybe even take some of these definitions, from the website that you've provided and put it together with, the work from prior subcommittee that also was focusing on restorative justice at that time, to input some definitions in, the document that's attached to the agenda, so that there's clarity about what we're advocating for and what we're suggesting. That was super helpful, and thank you for coming back again and again to keep helping us get farther along in our understanding and appreciation for the process.
Okay, no problem. If you ever want anyone to do an IRP style training, I can do it. I've been trained to do that type of thing. So if anybody interested in the whole thing, except those are like 8 hours long, 16 hours long, but so I can give an introduction to it if someone wants to look more. Of course, if you're good at reading and looking at videos, then you can do most of it yourself also, except you don't have the people. You need people to do it sometime. It's nothing without people. It's all about people anyway. So.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Anybody else have questions for Mark? I really appreciate you presenting. I missed you last meeting because I was on vacation, so I was happy to see you bring information today. So I appreciate you so much for doing that.
Yeah, well, there's some really good videos online about of people actually doing the Restorative Justice Conference. And so, I mean, there's like found about 60 different videos. So actually seeing it means a lot more. The whole structure of it and how they work it out in real life. So plenty of stuff.
Where would we go to see one of those videos or a number of them? Is that on the same website that you showed us?
No, I use YouTube. I was just trying to find my best ones I found, but there's lots of ones on there. There's actually one on the video of a conference that they did at a school. And it was really great. I mean, it's very involved when you do really restorative justice conference. You see, like in prison and different parts of it, you can do part of it, but to actually bring the victim and offenders together, or persons harmed and people who did it together, is it's actually difficult. Most people don't want to do it. So when you get it to work, but what you have to do is you deal with each party separately, and you have to see whether they're on board, whether they're going to tell the truth, whether they can. So you actually do a little circle with just one side first, then you do it with the other side. And if they agree they're going to come together and work together, then we do it. But if so you actually prepare people for it. You have to have a kind of an attitude. You're not going to stand up in the middle and start raging at people, but you will say, I'm really angry at you, you know. But see, it's a different thing of just like full blown. So it is very involved process, but you can prepare people who are in prison to take more responsibility, to have empathy and all kinds of things. That's one side. And then you can have the other side start to face whatever, like their trauma or their fears or their anger and their hate for the other person. And they can do it on that side. So a lot of projects and workshops really work on part of the process. Yeah, but actually it is kind of difficult to do it, to get everybody there together.
Mark, how were you introduced to all of this in the first place?
Well, restorative justice, like I said, when I was first working with when I met Michael Markham, because I saw his video, and then I was in grad school. And then later on, when I got a job with San Francisco Sheriff's Department, that was a few years after he left, they were practicing it still. So they did have men working on, like, especially men dealing with their role model violence, you know, how they respond based on their male image. But they did have occasionally where they actually sat down with both, you know, victim and offenders. But it's hard to get that done. But he worked with one side. He made sure they had education, accepted responsibility for what a lot of them were doing. So they're still one of the county jails that have so many programs, more than I've seen in anyone. They have them all over the place. Of course, now everything's on hiatus a little. So. Oh, and then I became restorative justice manager when I was with a nonprofit I was with ECS in San Francisco. So I became part of the committees that were trying to implement it first. I was an adult ed instructor then. And then I became the restorative justice manager after the previous one left after a year. So I was actually trying to implement it in the shelters and among my students. And it did make a big difference among my students. We started having a regular circle every week for a couple years. I called it pizza circle, because you do have to have something to get them to come. So I said, okay, you guaranteed pizza. So I would go over to Costco and bring the pizza back. You'd see me walking back a half mile with the pizzas in the bag. And then we'd have the pizza, and they were showing up, and eventually they did change. Some of them were very obnoxious a lot and wouldn't even listen to anyone. And then they warmed up, you know, they learned they could do the circle too. They would lead things. So, I mean, over time you give them, and it does make a difference, but you just got to hold it. So you need someone just to hold the circle into your community agreements. It works, but that's why it's so important in schools, because that's where we need to start. We got to change the culture, and it changes when you live with it and you grow up with it. It is a lot more easier to get through. So we are making progress, some.
Sounds like patience is so important.
Oh yeah, you need a lot of it. Well, just like raising children, you need some of it, but there's a balance too. Okay, Lila.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that everybody saw what Nicole P left in the chat in her update. So it's kind of long. I did, copy it and paste it so that I can read it, once this meeting is done. Nicole G, what would you like to do with the last, few minutes of the meeting for us to summarize this piece and have any, further action items that we want to take care of?
So due to timing at this particular point, I'd like to stop off with the presentation, the great presentation that Mark has done. I really appreciate it again. For those key items that we did not go over, I know we had a couple of other talking points in reference to restorative justice. I also copied what Nicole put in there and review the lesson learns. Monique, if it's all right, we can kind of put them on for our next meeting, and I guess just recap on what items we're walking away from for our next meeting. If you like, I know I have one written down in reference to the housing perspective and gathering documentation on some of the programs. And we have these last couple of items in reference to restorative justice that we can look at on our next call too that we didn't get to. And I know Nicole said she put the link in there from Mark's presentation, so I do plan on going to look into that more detail. So I guess we can take away from a committee if we want to look at what he presented today and come with any questions or any feedback to our next call. If Dale or Dr. Hernandez, any feedback you want to give on that, Lila?
I definitely think that's a great idea. I'd like to look more at that, the website and all the other options that Mark has introduced us to. I think it's a great overview. And I was thinking that too, to just YouTube one of these circles. So I think that'd be great to do before we come back next month.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, if you're willing to come to next month's meeting, I mean, I feel like you're an honorary member of our subcommittee. Yes. Your input and feedback is super important, and all the information that you're sharing with us. So, yeah, please, if you can come next month, that would be great for us. And I think, great for what we're looking to, provide as kind of summarizing the exploration and the work of restorative justice. I agree with Nicole that next time we could potentially pull up that document and agree on some definitions that we want to put in that document and see if there is, any updates that we need or further recommendations for research or investigation, for the coming year. That's all I have to say.
All I have to. Any other feedback from the rest of the committee? So we have like 4 more minutes, Monique. I did good this time. I stayed on time.
This has been loaded with information.
Yes, I have little pieces of paper everywhere.
Wow. Wow.
I just copied the link that Mark put in there as well for a video if you want to grab that one. And it automatically started with the sound. So yeah, thank you everybody for staying for the whole time, and everybody's contribution and input. It's been great.
Yes, thank you.
Are we ready to go?
Yeah, I was gonna say with that, is everyone to go? We can end that 2 minutes right before, or I'm used to Nicole saying we're gonna end it. So.
Okay, I'll say it, Nicole.
I'm like, Monique, is it okay?
So it looks like you guys are gonna go on and carry over these items, and Nicole and Lila, keep in mind, you guys can also discuss some of this offline. You won't jeopardize the quorum anyway. So the next meeting is adjourned. This meeting, you can adjourn it, Nicole, but the next meeting is November 18th from 11:30 to 1.
Okay, so I will adjourn this meeting, and thank you everyone for your input, and I'll see you on our next meeting. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Thank you.